Okay,
You're right on time.
I am, yeah, we're right on time. The clock is fast. I am opening this meeting of the Durham Housing Task Force, Monday, October 21st. And we actually have a
Everybody
full
here.
house, so we will start over here with Eileen.
Eileen Murphy?
Michael Saputo.
Judith Spang.
I'm Sally Tobias.
Paul Rasmussen.
Heather Grant.
And
Al Howland is
Al
closing the
Howland
door.
is closing the door. Make sure I'm not on somebody's. Now that I hope no, like, make sure I don't have somebody's real estate information. Like, oh, look how much they're paying for that house. Okay,
And Michael's here somewhere?
Michael is here somewhere. This is cup. His cup is here.
Fetching
He's-
papers.
Okay.
Okay, so we will start with the roll call. Do I have an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
There we go. Do you have any public comment? I see no one. There is no one in Zoom?
No.
Okay, dokie, so we have no public comment, so we will move on. Do we have, I guess we do have minutes of August 12th and September 9th. Do we have any issues with those? Do we, anybody? No? Okay, so do I have a motion to approve those August 12th and September 9th minutes?
So moved.
All right, do I have a
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye for the
Any
9th.
abstentions?
I abstain for the 12th.
Yeah,
Okay.
Who is that? And I wasn't here on the September 9th.
Michael. Yeah, and Michael. Thank you.
So Heather's abstains from the 9th and
Heather is the 9th. My phone doesn't work. Abstain. And who else? Somebody abstained
I have to
from?
abstain.
I abstain from August.
Okay. And you abstain from the 9th too?
September.
Yeah. And then Paul. Okay. Your report from committee members or anything? Do we have any committees? Al?
I'll just do it because I saw like on the planning board, you guys are having a workshop and part of it was like a legislative update thingy. So I thought we did meet in municipal county. There were 2 housing bills we did, talked about. They had been referred to interim study. And the only thing we could say is that were they really a bad idea and just nix them completely, or should they be potentially recommended for future legislation? The first one was House Bill 34, which it came from Conway, and the complaint up at Conway was that second homeowners were all coming in and buying up the real estate, driving up the home prices, and none of the workforce could have the houses. And so what their idea was to have like there's a tax exemption they could use, and it would apply to those people who use it as a primary residence, and then the secondary homes would not get the exemption, so they'd use the funding from the secondary homes to give tax relief to the primary home people. I don't think it would work. I mean, it only would be each time you did the new appraisal, maybe it would help a little, but it's not going to help the underlying issue. And so at least my recommendation was to look at RSA 162, which is the TIF, and think about, is there a possibility of using that, differentially taxing the primary versus the secondary home, so that you could use the money from the secondary homes, it could go into a fund in a TIF to fund infrastructure and housing. And that would allow you to address the root problem, which is the lack of housing. So we'll see what happens with that. The other one, which is House Bill 1544, which was allowed indemnification of a municipality. So if we said, look, at Wagon Hill parking lot, we're going to allow homeless to be up there, the municipality could not be sued if something happened. We thought that this does not solve the homeless problem. And so that has come up twice, and the idea really is that this needs to be a regional solution, especially when we think about building transitional housing. If we went through like the county, at least we could tax all the municipalities and take the funding to use it for a group effort. And so we recommended that there had been another bill that talked about that, so we said you should focus on that. In terms of what's coming forward, there are, at least that I know of, 3 bills that have been, 3 requests that went into the Legislative Service Office that deal with housing. 95 and 97 are coming from the ranking members of the municipal county Democrats. 95 establishes low-interest loans and grants for the Housing Champions Fund, so that's kind of the rewards thing. And the other one is House Bill 97, which will be expanding the Affordable Housing Fund, so that I think that's the funding mechanism. I have not seen the language for either of these. What I've heard is upwards of $5 million in funding. Believe it or not, I'm actually probably going to sign on to House Bill 95. But when I see the act, when it turns into a real bill and we have the language, we can bring it forward. The other one is will be House Bill 119, which is modifying the definition of ADUs. That one I'm working with Representative Alexander, who's a Republican. We modified the definition of ADU because the current one really is clunky and talks about detached ADUs. In this case, it would be anything that's subservient to the primary resident on a lot is an ADU. And then it allows either an attached or detached by right anywhere that you have single-family homes, as long as it meets the existing town
Setbacks.
zoning that would apply to a single-family home. You can't apply any more greater restrictions for ADUs than you do for single-family homes, and you can't allow a larger lot for ADU than you would for the single-family home.
Anything regarding the size of the ADU?
Oh yeah, so it's like 1,000 square feet, and it was currently it's either 750 or 800 square feet. I can't remember exactly what it is, but the thought process is if to make it handicap accessible, we should give it a little bit more size, and so 1,000 square feet seemed to be pretty good. I thought it's fine. That's not a hassle. So anyway, those will be coming up in January, and that is it.
Well, that could be interesting.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know whether this is for you or for Paul. At what point, if somebody builds an ADU, before the state definition comes in, at what point, if at all, does the municipal zoning grandfather?
That's a good question. Well, I think
It depends on how the state law is written, whether it grandfathers at all.
it doesn't, and it's like, so the thing about it is like I mean, currently it would be, the ADU would be restricted to 750 square feet. The new, if it did pass and if it did become law, it'd be 1,000 square feet. I think that they wouldn't go back to somebody and said the 750 square feet, oh, that's not a legal ADU. That smaller ADU would be grandfathered in, but the new definition of ADU, or the new ADU, would be larger, so anybody going forward could build a bigger ADU.
So what if you had something in the planning board that was in the works, but it hadn't been passed by the planning
Well, we're
board
talking about a maximum size here, so anything that's already in the works would still
Yeah.
qualify.
as grandfathered?
No,
No.
under
Well,
the
no,
new
because-
law.
Yeah.
That's a max, you can go up to.
Because we're talking about a maximum, not a minimum. So when you talk about minimums and somebody's building under the minimum,
Right.
then it becomes an issue. Now, if somebody is trying to get a variance to build something larger, it might get denied now, but once the new law goes into effect, they could point to the state law and say you have to allow it by right.
Good, thanks.
Yeah, an ADU that's 600 square feet is legal and will continue to be legal. The state's law is saying that municipalities cannot set a maximum under 1,000 square feet.
No, I
Over
think what the
1,000.
new laws, the RSA is saying is you can't set a, well, I don't know exactly
Maximum.
what is a maximum.
You can't. You can't require. So you could not require. In other words, the municipality couldn't come in the future and say, okay, we're only going to allow 800 square feet for an ADU. No, it's 1,000 square feet in the future.
Yeah,
so
so-
that's the you cannot have legislation that requires less than 1,000 square feet.
You can allow more.
More.
Right. So if that passes, that would put our ordinance into a position again where we'd have to do a quickie
We'd have to
quickie amendment.
change our numbers.
Right.
Yeah, which is fine.
Excuse me, Sally?
Yeah?
Mike Mulhern is in the Zoom room.
Oh, great. All
He's a-
right, Mike Mulhern just entered. Hello, Mike.
Hello, I'm trying to get my, there
There
it
he
is.
is.
How are you all? Sorry I couldn't make it in person today, I'm running too crazy.
If you want to say something, just yell.
I will do that.
Okay. All right, so that's interesting because that's probably something we're going to suggest, allowed a detached ADU. So, all right, anybody else? Planning board? That's just, any updates?
Oh, you probably mentioned the workforce housing going to the council tonight?
Yeah.
Not officially,
Well, it's,
Oh.
because we haven't gotten to the planning board.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
we are right there. Planning board, is anything from planning board unless there's anything more from the state?
Nope,
No,
I'm done.
Planning board? I'll go
All right.
planning board, then we'll go council.
So planning board is, we have a workforce housing amendment that was moved on to the town council. It is doing first reading tonight. I recommend everybody review the DCAT tomorrow to see what the town council decides with regards to a public hearing. And to see what the discussion around it ends up being, because that might shade our feelings on its prospects.
Or move us to get people to show up to support it. And that is really important. People don't realize you just have to show up to support it because the squeaky wheel does get the grease in this town.
Excuse me, because are we going to discuss this, or I was wondering what parts of it, that the changes that we might consider to be significant?
What? for the-
Significant
change-
changes, significant changes compared to what?
The previous one that we had the
It
hearing.
was a complete
Oh,
rewrite.
yeah, that's.
It's a complete rewrite.
It's a complete
I'd have
rewrite.
to, I would have to start from scratch and just go through the whole
So
thing.
I was asking which one you might consider to be significant of the changes.
Well, we're gonna get to it anyway.
Well, yeah, I think right now, the overlay is a completely new product, and that's going for first read at the town council tonight. And so just to kind of listen to what they think about what's in that. The discussion today will be about,
This is the second time we've sent, a workforce housing amendment to the town council. The first time they came back and suggested we redo it as an
Right.
overlay district. So this is so the new one is an overlay district. Which means it's only bits and pieces of the town where it would apply. Along 108 area up above Route 4 and out in the far end of Main Street. And I think most people are happy with it in general, but there's still significant pushback for people who especially don't want it visible. They want to hide it somewhere away where where we can, totally be unseen.
Are they picking up on the idea of an overlay for the downtown? It didn't look like it.
well, we haven't got there yet.
So there's going to be, this is just the first of probably 3 different amendments
Yeah.
that will be in support of workforce housing. One of the things that the planning board has to talk about is which one do we really want to put a lot of effort into next, whether it's going to be a downtown thing, which the housing supposed to be supporting, but if, now we come with the whole chicken and egg thing, right? One of the questions we got is, well, should the planning board wait for the housing task force? If we're doing significant work for the downtown focused stuff in the housing task force, then maybe we look at the third area, the planning board, as on their own.
But then you got 2 different, you have to come together in one.
At some point, but it's
Yeah.
a matter of which one's going to move faster. So if we have both in parallel, whichever one looks like it's making it to the finish line first will be the next one that we
Great, thank you.
that we really go after.
Paul, what do you think the third area is?
That's my question.
Well, so we have the downtown and we have the way out, and then there's that zone in between, which is, for instance, Co Drive and Garrison and the PO areas all have a lot of things there where right now a lot of them have converted to student housing, but they're of a mode that could switch back. And I'm not talking about the apartment buildings or the frats. I'm talking about like the two-family houses and stuff, which we could easily take a look at and say, hey, these could go forward as, let's allow quads there, where the two families are now. So maybe we get, because those two families are getting a little long in the tooth, and it might be enough to make a reno of those into a workforce housing idea appealing, especially if they can get federal grants or state grants to do it.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I think the question is, well, not the question, but we're looking at, the Durham Housing Task Force had proposed some amendments back in '22 that went to the planning board that got completely rejected. And then we came back and we started redoing the Housing Task Force, and then the overlay amendment, or the amendment from Michael about the key property came out, and then that went to an overlay. All right, so now what we have is, looking at us, we have from the outreach, there's certain things I think that we can suggest for some changes for housing in Durham. And then there's also the downtown, and the downtown actually covers a lot, as you said, has a lot of different areas and a lot of different perspectives. But there's some things in some of the outlayers like Co Drive and Church Hill that could actually be addressed in some of the various smaller changes that we could suggest.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose to better clarify what I think of as a third area, it's non-downtown infill. If you think of the transition, right now we go from single-family homes to the downtown. And we're not going to add missing middle housing in any real thing to the downtown itself, because that's going to be dense housing. But we have these areas between the center of downtown and the neighborhoods that could become more of the less dense multifamily stuff. The more two families, 3 families, 4 families, small apartment type things.
Yeah.
And that would be the area we look at, is try to figure out where those would fit and how to get that into our zoning. So that's sort of,
That would be the next.
and I would definitely want to be pushing that as a separate thing from the downtown.
It's completely separate. These would be completely separate recommendations, because the downtown is a completely different monster. And the downtown is not addressed in the overlay district, and it can't be, it's not appropriate. So that's a completely different thing. Heather, you have your hand up.
Well, I was going to say there was, at least from the town council, one of the representatives was talking a little bit about the single-family homes and in sort of, what about the detached homes? And I think, our zoning proposal adjustments on density back in 2022 would help to address infill. People don't want to see, sprawl, but they don't want to see the ability to infill. Well, you can't infill until you change the zoning, because our zoning lot sizes are so large. So I think that is an area that we should be looking at, because people say, well, what about, we need growth in single family. Well, where can we put them? If you don't want sprawl, there's infill.
Yeah.
And even with the ones where we know we want to have the ability still with the conservation subdivision to have, single family, I'll say detached because it's not single family homes if they don't own their own lot, but in the conservation subdivisions, if we could get more clusters, there's less sprawl. So those things that we addressed in zoning that would help bring in also detached homes that are also in shortage, if we could, those are ways we're addressing each section. We've got, hopefully apartments and townhomes and a mix for workforce housing. We have to enable the ability to build a single family home on a lot size that's less than 3 acres.
Yeah.
And then, addressing the downtown, which is again, high-density
It's
apartment
complex,
living,
yeah.
but it's very difficult because it's an aging infrastructure. So, boom, 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 you got all of them.
Yeah, there's some different things. So, I mean, I think we're definitely looking at separate entities. And what I wanted to start looking at today, and then I want you to give the council report, but
Yeah.
what I was hoping to really start looking at today was take a look at the old task force back in '22, the one that got thrown out, and because many of the things that we really did learn in the outreach, this supports. So we could look at it. We're not going to just say carbon copy it, copy paste it, but look at what we don't need and what we could use and suggest going forward as far as density changes. There was some, you're seeing like the first page of it. The blue is really new wordage, new text that we suggested. But then we'll get into density. And so we kind of look at that, and then we can kind of create, this would allow us to create, I would say to focus on the density and that infill options. I don't think it would be a great thing to get too into downtown stuff with this, because I think that's a completely different thing that needs to be addressed very differently. But this would allow us to look at the ADU situation. It could look at the lot sizes required in various conservation subdivisions, allow us to create some more infill and maybe address some of our, like Churchill, like those are those older homes that maybe if we gave them an option to become not single family, but workforce housing or something like that. It's very challenging.
Yeah, I'd like to throw out an idea, and that is that I consider a conservation subdivision that is put in the outskirts of town to be sprawl, like the one on Packers Falls Road.
Yeah.
Why is that not considered sprawl? Is it because the development of the town doesn't reach out there, so it encompasses it, but it's still placing a lot of housing outside of the
Yeah.
current activity? I don't think we can rely on conservation subdivisions in the country to not be sprawl.
Well, I think that's a whole different,
Interesting.
yeah, it is
Point,
interesting
yeah.
because they tend to be in our rural areas. But let's get to that when we start talking about this, because I still want to just get,
If you wouldn't mind, I'd like.
yeah, by one
So
of the council
it's-
reporting.
A conservation subdivision is less sprawl than if we didn't have a conservation subdivision and it was just
It would
three
be-
houses
yeah.
on that same spot that's doing 8 or 10. So that's the idea behind it. My disagreement with our current use of conservation subdivisions is they're based on a ratio of the underlying lot size when they should be a lot denser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And-
Right, almost by definition, at least as I see it, as a professional planner who thinks about this a lot, the difference between what makes development in outlying suburban and rural areas not sprawl is development as a conservation subdivision. So in my view, you can have pretty high density, but as long as you're preserving 30, 40, 50+% of the land, it's not sprawl. Now, it depends on the density and the nature of the development, but to be very frank, in my view, especially considering the housing crisis in this country, if we treat any development outside of core areas as unacceptable sprawl, we're going to have a big problem, because
Yeah,
that's where the
yeah.
land is.
Yeah.
So, in my view, that land we have to accommodate development. It's how you develop it, and a conservation subdivision is the answer.
Right, but if you have something that then comes in between the conservation subdivision and the town, it's sprawl.
Well, can we?
But I had one more.
Listen, I want to just get the council report in, because we haven't finished that yet, so if you could just quickly give us that.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot that has to do with housing. We did have a Stratford Regional Planning Commission present a overall introduction to the things that they help with at the town, at the town level in terms of grant funding and things like that. They also are, deeply involved with housing. I did not realize that the Stratford Regional Planning Commission was not our county. It actually goes beyond that. So structure in New Hampshire I didn't know about. Is weird. Yeah, it's all weird. There was an energy committee proposal. I didn't even know that we have a $5 tax on our car registration that actually goes into a kitty for transportation, even sidewalk improvements, road improvements, whatever. But anyway, they wanted it 100% to go to net zero initiatives. We tabled that because, to me, a lot of the things that are net zero also require roads. If you want a bike lane, you have to have a good road for it, things like that. So they tabled it for us to look at the budget timeframe, because right now they can take that kitty, and if there's a specific budgetary item that could really improve, a good example of that are the pedestrian stop sign things that have been put up, things that'll help improve safety, but maybe didn't get budgeted enough in the DPW. So it's more flexible to be able to put it where you need it rather than all of a sudden putting it into one thing. Probably a little bit of info for you guys is that there was a presentation by Dr. Shaps of the Oyster River School District talking about the fact that they are going to be looking at long-range planning and a building needs assessment. So they're doing that even though we aren't seeing necessarily a large increase in student population. We've had another, we did have the bump at the elementary level, but they're looking more at just in general long-range planning, and that's about it.
All right. So there's a lot of thoughts about it. We had to kind of I think we need to have an idea as to where we're going and what we want to really be focusing on because I think we're at the point now where we need to start looking at some more proposed zoning changes to present as a option. I'm not sure how we want to present it to the planning board, but as some options to the planning board that does not include a downtown yet. We got to keep these two separate. We will get to the downtown one, but we got to keep these two separate. And some of them could affect areas of the downtown. So what are people, from what we looked at, we had here.
I was just going to do in terms of what number 7 is on here, which is the housing outreach initiative.
Yeah.
And I think that, I got to go to a couple of the outreach where the presentations were at the different committees. I went to the agricultural one, and I was also on the Parks and Rec one when we did it.
Yeah.
And I think, Sally took notes on everything. I think, and it kind of came up when you were talking about, conservation subdivisions and infill and all that kind of stuff. What were the common themes, if we could put something together, and I know you'd started to do that, what were the common themes that came out of those committees? Out of 2 of those committees, the thing that I heard come out was infill development, which we started talking about. I thought it was really interesting with the Agricultural Commission, because when they came to the planning board when it was a public hearing, and they were like, we have to protect this land because it's farmland. But actually, when we met with the Agricultural Committee, they were very in favor of infill development. They were the conservation subdivision will protect enough land. The land was not being farmed anyway, but by doing the conservation subdivision and protecting a big chunk of it, it gives us a better shot than nothing. And they were in favor of ADUs. I think there was people that were shocked that you could not build duplexes in most of our residential zones. They're like, what do you mean? So they're like, there's no avenue in Durham for people to get in unless it's the single family home, which is prohibitively expensive, or student housing. So I think in terms of what we're supposed to do, if we could have kind of a wrap up of because I think you've seen everybody, we'll have a presentation of what did we find. Because before we're going to introduce the next set of changes or whatever they're going to be, if we can have what we found from what people thought were interesting, that kind of points us to certain changes that we think would be good.
Yeah, and I had some copies of what I only have a couple left, but anyways, I don't know if you still have them. I can
Oh,
probably-
Sally, if you email me, I'll forward that to everybody.
Okay. These are basically from that, and I think that there are some solid things that we can suggest that actually were in the original zoning amendments that came together in '22, but the tweaking of conservation subdivisions, and we have some thoughts on that. The ADUs being able to have more adaptability as far as where you can have them, whether it be attached or detached, duplexes, and consider some fourplexes in some areas. And also the mixed use in some of our commercial zones that right now we don't allow multifamily housing. There could be some options there that we could look at. So
I thought I was at the Historical Commission's session on the housing, and I think they were the most adamant that, you think about the history of how towns are built. You built your home, whatever kind of dwelling unit was okay everywhere, right? You could have a duplex next to a boarding house, and then maybe a single-family home. And the lot sizes were all over the place, and that kind of does help create that feeling of, not row after row of homes, and that absolutely the houses, the lot sizes were too big, and not being able to allow multiple types of housing that helps create a town. We've gotten away from all of that with some of this stricter zoning, and I think that they were the most adamant that yeah, we need to make changes in the zoning that makes it able for people to build things that make sense for them and the community. So I thought that was very interesting.
I mean,
I think when you get into more, people that are really, really on certain types of committees, the environmental, obviously, and ag are all obviously very passionate about the saving of land, but then they have a nod for those certain other areas.
and we can.
So it was interesting.
Increasing the density isn't not going to have a change on the amount of land we're still conserving
Exactly,
in the conservation
yeah.
subdivision. Yeah.
Conservation subdivisions, I worked hard on this when we were bringing them in, and now I'm beginning to take a second look. I think it matters very much how they're set up. I think originally people were thinking about wildlife conservation. If you chop up a piece of land so that you're interfering with wildlife corridors, or a lot of species need to have a big contiguous piece of open land, conservation subdivisions are not going to do it. When we went to talk to the farmers, the same thing occurred to me there. When we were talking about the Keefe property, we'll have a big chunk of open land that can be farmed. But if there are smaller parcels that protected land is, that it's not going to be farmable. So I think it's a matter of, we've got the regulations in place, but it matters very much. Maybe we need to tweak it, but it matters very much where that open space is.
Michael, do we require that open space to be contiguous? I mean, at this point?
Well, it has to be, planning board has to approve it, and they have some pretty good criteria. I mean, you could have several areas, but the planning board's only going to approve it if it's good open space, if it's important natural cultural resources.
Well, you can't guarantee that they will.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to.
I think you have to have language that.
Oh, I mean, we could certainly tweak that, but the planning board is not going to approve as your open space, odd fragments here and there that are not useful. It's going to be contiguous and important. But, the language could be tweaked.
We do consider the wildlife, but the wildlife corridors is something that did come up.
Yeah, which isn't in writing now, and I think it really has
not in
only
writing.
come out as a really important topic in the last several years, because I never even heard about, worrying about those corridors until, I don't know, say the last 4 years.
The only reason it's not in writing yet is because the Conservation Committee has been sitting on it.
Oh, they're still trying to, well, I thought that was coming out to us soon in the planning board area, but either
The
way.
subcommittee gave it to him a year ago.
So anyway, I think that even somebody brought up the fact that it was in the environmental and, the conservation group that talked about, hey, when we have this open space, it's not open space if it's just sitting there for the use of the people on that conservation.
Yeah, I think land
Land.
stewardship, Sarah,
Brought that up, and she
Yeah,
brought up the
she was-
corridors, and we don't even know where are they mapped yet on the, do we know where they are? You know what I mean? That
Follow
was
the water.
Huh?
90% of them are follow the water.
right, but we don't have that
or the trains. The train
in
line.
there.
I think back to what Judith was saying about like that conservation subdivision on Packard's Falls. And I
That
think
was
that's.
also built like in the 90s.
I mean, the thing about
80s
that
and
is, like,
90s.
because I bike past that a lot, and when you look at it, I think that's kind of what we don't want to do in the future. It's like, those houses are, what, $800,000, $900,000 houses.
They're
You build-
McMansions.
More than
You
that.
build
They're
these
McMansions.
McMansions. So the conservation element of it is kind of dubious, to be honest. It's like a bunch of really rich houses that I don't think it's really kind of what we're looking for going forward. I think we want more like duplexes and density out there, and then really protecting conservation land, including the wildlife corridors.
treat-
And that's a real conservation subdivision, rather than saying, hey, we have a park over here, and that counts as conservation subdivision.
And I think we've been unsure about whether putting in a soccer field is open land or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing, the Recreation Parks and Rec wanted a lot of that kind of thing. And I think that that's something that you're not going to get a developer to put something like that in if you're looking at workforce housing, but and we can't guarantee everything
Well,
that's built is workforce.
We did include that as a potential way
potential
of
in
getting
the
a
override,
density
yeah.
increase
Yeah.
or some
Yeah,
other thing.
yeah.
But there has to be
Incentive.
an incentive. But there's also an opportunity for the town to put something in. But is that open space? It's not. It's developed space if it's a soccer field.
I know,
Well,
it's
the
a
language
shame,
in
though.
the language in the
Parks are
ordinance
good.
is, I think, is quite good. As I say, you could certainly revisit it, although we've only had in the last 12 years, since I've been here, 2 conservation subdivisions. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of it happening. But there's a page and a half of language, which is quite good. It's a lot of open space, all the unusable land, plus a high percentage of the usable land, so it's a lot of acreage. And then it says the 7 areas that's restricted to: conservation, wildlife habitats, scenic views, cultural resources. It does allow passive and active outdoor recreation with some limitations: forest management, agriculture, community recreation, support facilities like community wells. It does allow some wastewater disposal, other appropriate uses, and then you've got to have provisions for use ownership, legal mechanisms. So the ordinance is really quite good. Unfortunately, we have not had many in recent years, and whether they turn out to meet the vision in reality is also another question.
Well, I mean, since we've only done 2 in 12 years, it's kind of hard to say the ordinance is good.
The ordinance
It's
is,
like, because we
But it's
haven't
not
really used it.
particular.
So
Well, that's
But before that,
because-
we have a number of them.
but we
you know.
also we don't have a high enough density number in that conservation
Yeah.
subdivision, and we know that. And so it's it's going to be expensive housing.
And people don't have a problem living closer together, especially if you're in a conservation subdivision. In the issue with with sprawl, unfortunately, a lot of these large parcels of land are on the outskirts. But that's how communities kind of grow out.
Well, that
And so there's that. But if we're going to
Well-
have that, at least to have the higher, if you're gonna disrupt the land for and today, in building them today, they're gonna be be close to $2 million.
unless you have it as a cottage cluster or something.
Yeah, but you can
But
build
then-
tighter, smaller footprint homes. They're still gonna be going into the 700,000s for a small 2,000 square foot
Right.
home, 18,000 square foot home, 15,000 square foot home. That's 3 bed, smaller footprint.
Too bad.
Still market value at $750,000. So it's not like we're going to be building HUD level, 380.
It's not affordable. In the same.
And then there's a whole new term, attainable, and that's a whole new term.
Oh, I have to change, yeah.
And it's complicated, but you're not going to get any of that in closer to town. Unfortunately, that's where the large pieces are.
In the same vein, I've been thinking about an ADU. If the ADU is in a very desirable part of town, do we know that it's going to be at an attainable level? Or is it going to be just a little bit
Well,
less?
they're all market level.
They're all market.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
Well, it's
so
whatever it's a private ownership at that point, so it's whatever the owner wants to do, right?
It's more about increasing supply.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's increasing.
And supply is key. I mean, because the more supply there is, so you say you have an ADU, and you've got somebody they put their ADU and they're going to charge, $2,000 for you to live in this 2-bedroom ADU, and it's very nice, But that person that's going to move into there may have been chosen to live in a 1,700 or a 1,500 flat in Dover because it's all they could find, because now there's more supply. Now I can afford more. Now I can make that available for somebody who can afford less.
Well, what
Because
if
that's
it's grandma and grandpa that's moving in there?
Who cares?
Who cares?
I don't care.
But their
I don't care.
income level is quite a
I don't
bit
care.
higher
It
than
doesn't-
what we're
But we
thinking
can't-
we're going to get with an
It's-
ADU.
But no,
It's economics, all right? What we're dealing with here now is core economics. And the fact that housing is a necessity.
Supply and demand.
Because it's a necessity, it's supply and demand curve. It isn't like that for milk. Milk is, I can replace milk with something else if I have to get something to drink. Or bread, or, you need food, but the food's usually replaceable by some other food. Housing isn't. That means that supply and demand curve is extremely steep. So a change in the supply can have a dramatic effect on the cost. And that's been the big problem here, is we've been, over the last several decades, we've been tightening and tightening the supply to the point where now the costs are just skyrocketing. And until we get that supply, quibbling over what the supply looks like, it's the wrong thing to be doing. We just need supply.
Well, the thing is, the ADUs are the ultimate infill too, especially an attached ADU. An attached ADU, you're not pouring a new foundation. You're not really doing much. You're just taking an existing house and adding an apartment in it. And so if you're against sprawl, you definitely want ADUs, because you want to infill what we already have and not sprawl out into the conservation areas. And so it's the lowest hanging fruit we can have, and gives us a lot of flexibility. I think worrying about like whether it's going to be workforce or non-workforce, or if it's grandma or like a graduate student, is clearly the wrong question. Allowing it will add supply and is beneficial both to the homeowner and to the rental market. So it's kind of a no-brainer, and which is why I think there's legislation coming through that hopefully will pass.
If you're gonna squeeze grandma, that's on you.
Well,
Grandma's such a pain in the ass.
Grandma's going to pay for
What,
it.
I'll tell you.
The thing is, it's so much flexibility with an ADU, because you can have family members that are living there. You can have your kids as they're growing out of college and saving. You can have, it can help with care. You can have the grandma and grandpa moving in, or mom and dad moving in, the family move. There's a lot of flexibility. It does make generational living easier, and that is something to encourage. We can't, when it comes to housing, and I think Dover is a good example of this. Dover says we can't sit here and worry about every little number as to how much people are paying. We're increasing supply, and in that we are getting some good workforce housing levels and some fair market levels, because we are encouraging that. But you can't. You're limited as what you can build. It's expensive to build. To build a brand new home, the lowest you're going to be able to put it out there at right now is like $650, and it's probably going to go for $750 because there's going to be more than one bidder right now.
Well, I just was throwing it out. I didn't mean to take over a good pun.
No, but it's a good thing to consider for the conservation subdivision. We do need to look at what our density is in there.
So I was just going to say to the outreach initiative for us, it would be nice if we can put something up, a summation, and we put that in the community, that this is what we found from the committees. These are areas of interest that people express to us, and maybe areas that they don't want. Because if we can put that out and maybe write it up in a thing and put it in Friday updates, just so the community knows what we're doing.
That's a good idea.
And then, because that will lead us into the next step, before we get into the minutia of like what a conservation subdivision looks like and all that kind of stuff, if we can at least say, these are the things that people are interested in, and
Yeah.
then we can, then that, even on this agenda, then it's like downtown and zoning changes and housing champions and all those kind of things. Let's get to what people, the consensus really was in the community, what they thought was
Yeah.
important.
Okay, this is my last question for the next 30 seconds. I don't hear us talking, when we're talking about all these overlays and things, have we stopped talking about the Keefe property?
Well, that's part of in the overlay district. That's,
Because when you were
That's like the
identifying where
next
those
thing.
areas would be,
Well-
I didn't hear us talking about the Keefe
well,
property.
because that,
That's
It's in the-
considered part of the area above Route 4 off of 108.
here.
Should we, why don't we just
Yeah.
review that? Isn't that next
Eileen
one?
That's eight. That's eight
Eileen
on the
passed
agenda.
over. Is that the picture?
Okay, thank
It was
you.
Michael's, yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, that's it.
And I
for
will
me.
say, the questions from all of you have been good, because you've prompted, Mike started it, and I've been adding
Here's
a list, creating a list of things that go into that third piece, and I already have 3 things on it, so.
Yeah.
There we go.
Now, some of the suggestions we make in our overview of things, like, because the idea of mixed-use residential in our commercial areas or multifamily housing in our commercial areas did come up in the outreach. People felt that, some of that may encompass some of the areas that are involved in the overlay, but that's fine. An overlay can be used to go over this piece of property. We can still tweak the zoning within that property, and they can go with their different options. Like the overlay, workforce housing overlay district that the Keefe property is part of does not prevent the Keefe property still from developing it as a standard conservation subdivision right now. They could do that too.
Right. Heaven forbid.
Well, I think they did price it out. I think they
There
scoped
weren't
it
a lot of
out.
lots
Really?
There wasn't a lot of homes that. they
on
could
117 acres, but
build. It was what, 9
It'd be
houses?
really nice houses.
something like that, with maybe, a little more, maybe a dozen, but that's with the double the senior bonus.
And that's the primary reason why I say the conservation subdivision, as it currently exists, is broken. That,
Yeah.
I think it could be fixed with
Oh, easily.
about two
Yeah.
significant tweaks, could
Yeah.
probably fix it very easily.
And make it worth it.
And that's a very big question for the task force and the community. I don't know when you're going to want to take it up, but the density is really low.
Well, that's one of
know-
the things that's on my third piece list.
Yeah.
For dealing with the transit, transit zone, and I'm thinking of it now as a transit zone thing.
I mean, again, back to the what number 7 on here on our outreach. If we say what the community, what we found that they're interested in, how do you get those things that you're interested in is the next question, and that will lead us into, as Paul has his list of zoning, that'll bring the community along. How do you get the things that we thought we were interested in?
Yeah.
And I think we as the housing task force, since we're trying to educate people, that's a great thing.
So just to get an idea in our head, we're definitely looking at the conservation subdivision, ADUs,
Duplexes,
duplexes, and I think there could be some conversations to have about duplexes in town, 'cause there is some concern. The reality, though, is the conditions on the ground are very different now than they were when a lot of the duplexes got taken over. And it could be there are some things we could do to make sure that didn't happen again. Deed restrictions and things like that. There are some things that we could do that never were thought of before. But a lot of people were surprised. A lot of people were surprised that you can't build duplexes because they said, but we have them. It's like, well, yeah, but they're not legal anymore. But that would be in certain zones, but it could be part of a conservation subdivision too, some duplexes.
Do we have townhouses as an option?
Well, that, meaning the townhouses that would be part of like
Attached.
4
Yeah.
units. No, we don't allow that at all anywhere.
Right, but I mean, that's another way to get
Yeah.
people to get in at a lower price.
Fourplexes, yeah. Condominium townhouse style fourplexes, or even the garden style condominium option, which is, the garden style is, it's kind of a
Flex.
misnomer. Basically they're the buildings where you enter in and there's probably like 8 condos inside the building. So you enter into the building, you go up the stairs and yours is here, and, you know, and Exeter
like a
has some
center
good
court.
examples of it.
Doesn't it have a center court?
They may have a Senate, depends, but they're separate units. In it, there's usually no more than 8, because they don't want to go up more than 2 stories, because then they have to deal with elevators and stuff. But the townhouse option with a 4 or 5 or 6, depending upon, yeah. You can go to any other community and see them. They just don't have them here. The fourplexes, townhouse fourplexes. And that's single family to purchase. Those are condos, yeah.
Do you think we can put that out, like a summation of what we found?
Yeah, I think we can put
Before the
together.
November next meeting,
Yeah.
and we can get it out to the community, because I think I'd like to keep, it'd be nice if we kept moving the ball forward, and I think that we put a lot, I mean, you put a
Yeah.
lot of work into going to all these committees, so I think it'd be really helpful for the community to see it, and then we can have the next conversation.
Do you want, Sally, you and I could work on it?
Yeah, we can
Do
do that.
you want to bring it to the task force, so before we put it in Friday updates?
No, we've kind of presented everything. It's going to be coming out of the PowerPoint that I presented anyway, so they've seen it. And then we could throw it out to everybody and let them see it. But we could do that, because I think we do need to sum up for the community what we've heard.
I have a suggestion in that, being a very visual person, I can see presenting the information on 2 large foam core boards. One, which would be the limitations of current zoning, as it exists now, and some of the issues associated with that. And then the second one is the outreach information, whereas these are some of the ideas that we've heard. These are some ways to increase density without overburdening the community. Here are some options that Durham doesn't allow, but if they did allow, would meet some of the needs. So I see it as simply 2 large poster boards.
That's actually a really good
That's
idea.
a
We
great
could
And then we
create some
could use
for
them
out
other
here.
places,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we
Yeah.
could place them out here,
Yeah,
and then we could have a smaller version of it as a,
yeah,
Well, yeah, if you have it as a
Handout.
PDF and online,
Right.
then you can
resize them.
always refer to it from Friday updates.
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good idea, because it is very, people need quick visual. I don't like to sit, oh, wait a minute, bunch of words, I'm not reading that, I don't have time. I want to see it. Well, it's how people are, That's a good idea.
We could try to put that together for Friday updates.
Yeah, and then we could
Work on
create a
that.
larger version of it for foam core. And I mean, Amy's frames can put anything for us on, she can seal it onto foam core. 'Cause we did that for Celebrate Durham a lot for some posters. And then we can have up front, and then people can see, because people don't really know. It's amazing how people don't understand zoning in this town. I don't understand.
It's easy. I've gotten through I've moved like 4 times and I've never even read the zoning in any other town I ever lived on. Didn't even know it existed.
I know, it's just I didn't even know, I kind of have dreams about zoning now.
Yeah, exactly.
But, all right. So that's what we're going to start looking at. Now, do we want to segue a bit to the housing champions? Or do we want to just do a quick review of what what I have up on the screen right now was what we selected as a task force in November of '22, and it did not go well. It did not go well. There was a lot of dodging and weaving of the stones that were being thrown at us. And I think a lot of it is because the conversation really, there wasn't really a lot of conversation about housing and the concerns, what was happening in the state, what was happening in the country, and what was happening to individual people. So there are some things in here I think we probably wouldn't bother with. There's a lot of definitions here.
Has the planning board since been updating all these definitions? So they don't need
None
to
of these
correct-
definitions that are in here went to the planning board, but
Right, but the planning board has been working on.
They have been, yeah, and so
revising
that's why,
definitions.
I think we went through that, Paul, you could say like, don't even worry about it, like the first one, accessory dwelling, everything in blue is what we suggested.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you the language, so I actually, in the bill that we're filing, accessory unit dwelling, the definition up there is changed.
Yeah.
I will,
And-
I will grab that language and
Well,
share it with the task force.
Have we changed that one too? We have changed some, but would we want to, we can just kind of look at this. There has been some changes to the definitions just lately in the planning board. The whole idea of attached, dwelling unit, detached. We suggested a definition of area median income. That actually does the HUD fair market rent area to which Durham belongs is established and updated. I mean, do you think we would need that? I don't know if we would need that definition.
I mean, I think that I brought it up to like people in Concord. My concern was that, especially in the housing champions, everything, workforce housing, the definition, the HUD value is what everything references. But when you do fair market rent, the numbers are not exactly the same. So when you do,
They're not.
when you do the HUD definition of workforce housing, it uses area median income, and it works off that. When you do the fair market rental, it does the actual rents, the 40% in it, so the numbers are not the same. And my concern would be, and so in that case, the fair market rental value was actually higher than the workforce definition. And my concern was, like, you put forth a
people
zoning
can-
definition, you say, okay, X percentage of this is going to be fair market rental. You want to make sure that that qualifies for workforce, because ultimately, if you're going to try to qualify for state grants or funding, you want to make sure you can get them. So if you put in fair market and your fair market doesn't actually meet the workforce housing definition, and you don't qualify, that means you can't get the money from the
Yeah,
state.
I don't know, I mean, I'm not sure, do we need this?
No,
as a
Al,
definition?
I just want to, and no, Al's making an important point, and I just want to clarify this. I just want to, because it's very relevant to this workforce housing ordinance that's
Yeah.
coming to the town council tonight. Unfortunately, in my view, in the state law, well, they define workforce housing, well, maybe it's a common definition across the country, but the state defines it based on area median income. And originally, when the task force and I were looking at this workforce housing ordinance, we were all wrestling with this. And I met with 4 authorities. I just want to state this again. Sarah Reitzman and George Regan of the New Hampshire Housing Agency, experts on housing. Ryan Pope, thank you. The Housing Navigator in Dover, and Nick Taylor, the director of the Seacoast Workforce, 4 experts in housing. I met with them, and they all said, when you do this ordinance, use HUD fair market rent, because it's very easy to use. It's set by number of bedrooms. Don't use this. So I want to just make it clear, there is a glitch in the definitions, but we are using something strongly recommended by 4 major housing experts in New Hampshire. So, but Al's point is
Well,
spot on.
I mean, to my point, the reason, so, I mean, Paul was just bringing, the RSA needs to be changed. It's like, first of all, no one in the state, I can't imagine, is going to say, wait a second, you've built housing that is meeting the standard of, so let's suppose 20% of your development is vouchers, and the vouchers actually have a higher standard than workforce. You're going to say, wait a second, I'm not going to give you a grant because the voucher program
It-
doesn't meet the workforce. So it is a glitch in the RSA that needs to be fixed for sure. In my opinion, Dover and now Durham using the fair market is the way to go.
So-
you want to use you want to use the voucher as your ceiling. I think in terms of us going forward and just in terms of the proposed workforce housing overlay ordinance, I think the important part is that you have the flexibility that you use the averaging of the
Yeah.
rents, because when you looked at the New Hampshire Housing Survey and they took the median income of renters, actual renters, they could afford like $1,430 a month. The top voucher is $2,000. That's for a 2-bedroom. The top voucher is $2,000. I mean, that's a huge delta there. And so if you're, by utilizing that rent averaging, and we saw it in the Banner Drive development in Dover, I'm going to put in, and that's why I don't think it's a good idea, by the way, to have income caps when you do this. You can say, look, I'm going to build a 3-bedroom apartment that's really nice in that development, and that's going to subsidize something that's down at $1,400. I mean, the lower end of the work. I mean,
It helps cover.
workforce is 60%, but there's below that there's a significant need. And I think even in your ordinance, it's about 20% of the development has to be, 80% of fair market. Sorry to use all those numbers, but that comes out to about $1,500 a month. And so to build those units, you need more expensive units. And we've seen that. I mean, again, we can provide clear examples of where developments are done. And I think the community itself, one of the concerns that was raised about the Keefe property is that we were going to have a monolithic development of just workforce housing standard. And by using the cost averaging, we're saying, no, we definitely
You
are not
have a
going to
mix
do
of
that.
people.
Doing the monolithic thing would not allow us to meet the spectrum of our need. By using the cost averaging, we're using the more expensive units to build some even lower units. And so that's why I think the cost averaging is important. And I think that's why in this ordinance, you do not want to do you can only make X amount of money to rent these apartments. That's a bad idea.
Yeah, definitely.
ramble.
Yeah, no, it is,
It's
but
good.
the area median income, do we need that as a definition, you think? What do people?
It might be confusing. Well, it's
Yeah.
not in the planning board's draft.
I think there's a lot of
That's a
definitions
question.
that I think I would just steer away from at this point. I'm going to try to just come through this a little faster. But yeah, the income averaging actually, we hit a blue, allows some flexibility. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I'm having a hard time getting my head around this. The income averaging sounds like a really good deal from a real estate point of view. If the average price of a home skyrockets, but average incomes do not, that means that our affordable housing becomes achievable by fewer and fewer people. And isn't it our goal to make sure that these are attainable by people? And if the average cost of housing gets beyond what they can afford, then I don't think we're getting what we were
Well,
after.
there's only the market is creating, the
Right.
affordability index is, I don't know what it is this month, but in July it was like 50%. And we've gone through decades where it's been like 120%.
Right.
Which means that only 50% of the people in the state can afford it. So,
You-
but the way you get, and this may be reasonable anyway, this word attainable is becoming more of the word used than affordable, because affordable is kind of, is subjective. But attainable is like, people can get there. People can get there. And there are programs out there to allow, like even first-time home buyers being able to buy a house for $535,000. It seems like a lot of money, but it's attainable at wherever there are because of how much they make and some off, but what the builders need to create housing that is attainable is smaller footprints and being able to build more on a lot, because they can't build if they're not going to make money at it.
I was going to say the thing to your answer too, that's why you put deed, and that's why the housing champions, it's all in there, is deed restrictions. So the deed restriction is tied to the HUD or the HUD standard. So, right now in any
Well, it's
rental thing.
Two different things, really.
Well, like right now, like in a rental unit, speaking of like, because of the market, you can have a building and you have an apartment and there's a short supply of housing. A private developer comes in, they buy that building and they go to their tenants and say, I'm going to raise your rent like $500. If it's deed restricted and it's tied to the HUD value, you can't do that. And
But
so
she's right that the HUD value can go up. I
The HUD
mean, there's
could.
nothing we can do to control that except working
Yeah.
on the supply side, because we can't control the fact that
Yeah.
the HUD values do
We-
get recalculated.
We just have to make it easier for builders
That's the way
to
it is,
build
unfortunately.
more efficiently on the amount of
Right.
land they
Well, my
have.
question, I guess, goes around, who's to define attainable? Attainable by people of what income level?
Well, it's the
It's the
market.
new
tied to the HUD
euphemism.
value.
It's,
There'll be another euphemism in
But
10
it's
it's
just
years.
basically the affordable, as we did with the
Well,
average
It's all the
income?
same. It's just
no,
another
there's no
term.
number crunching. It's just a word they're using. And really what it comes around is that when you look into it, when you're looking in an area, when you're say in a town, and the average like they did it in Dover for the Sophie Banner is a good example. In Dover, the average house, single-family home, is running $750,000, $850,000, $950,000, $1.2 million for for a single-family home. They built new homes, brand new homes, which are always cost more than previously built, already existing. And they built them denser and smaller and closer together in an area. So you got quite a few homes in a smaller area where you would have only gotten maybe 3 houses before. Now they have 22. Those went out on the market at about $650. All right, they ended up selling in the 7s, but those were attainable for people because they were $200,000 less than another choice, or $100,000 less than another choice. Or
Were they
even
attainable by
By
people
a-
with a certain income?
Well,
or-
yeah, they're not, no home is attainable for everybody. You have to have the income because the bank is only.
Right,
gonna-
well, that's what I was saying, that we should be always looping back to making it relative to the average income. So we make
Well-
sure that whatever the real estate market wants to do with the cost of housing, that our target people with a target income are going to be able to get these units.
And that's a surefire way to shut down development.
Sure.
We can't guarantee that. We have to
That's
let-
one of the reasons why we don't have supply now.
Yeah.
We can't guarantee it, and the reason,
Well, and we can't get rent control either, so.
No.
we
there's
can't
just-
get rent control.
But the thing
We don't
about
want
this-
it.
the thing about Sophie Banner Drive thing, those, I think they were 1,400 or 1,500 square. They're deed restricted. You can't make them bigger, and so the deed restriction mechanism. It's not perfect, but the idea about deed restriction is try to control the cost increase to give you a better shot. And I mean, again, under the current market, when we saw housing prices over the last 3 years go up 36%, if like that one, so you build that 1,500 square foot house at Sophie Banner Webb, and in 2 years it's gone up 36%, it's attainable to somebody really wealthy, but it's deed, the deed restriction is, whether you're tying it to fair market rent or also size, you're trying to control it. I mean, but to Paul and Sally's point, it's a supply issue. You gotta build more supply because you're never gonna control the price if you don't. I mean, you could do rent control, but I'm telling you, there's a really strong.
Yeah,
I think the other thing,
Right,
though, is
okay, I
that particular concept also had units that were at market value, so that the other units could be made more affordable.
Yeah.
And that's at whatever percent of salary, blah, 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 of the calculations. But to me,
They were
it's,
able to do more.
we need to focus on what we can control, because all of the outside sources are, influences. Who knows where they'll whirl to,
Yeah.
1 year, 2 years, 3
And
years,
it comes
4
to
years from
density.
now.
It comes down to density.
So just regarding the agenda, I want to point out items 9 and 10.
Yeah.
So those are, Paul mentioned there's maybe 3, give or take, initiatives. And item 9, again, the impetus for this was really 2 things. Well, anyway, the Housing Task Force has created a committee. And there's 3 members of the Housing Task Force and 2 members of the Planning Board on this committee. And they're going to meet soon. We will set up that meeting. It's a public committee. Those will be public meetings. We're going to set that up soon. And this committee is going to look at, strategies to enhance housing in the downtown. And we can talk more about this if you'd like. Item 10 is an additional thing of other amendments we can look at. And this is going back to that proposal the task force put together in 2022. And I think the key part of that is the tables of uses and dimensions. I emailed that out. I wasn't able to print it just now, but Sally has it up here. And, this is, I think, what we're talking about with the meetings of those community meetings. And you identified in the table of uses and table of dimensions the kinds of changes. And I think we're talking about revisiting that now, right?
Yeah.
Rotate that.
I emailed those out. I couldn't print them just now for some reason.
Yeah,
But
these
we have
are-
them up here.
These are our zoning restrictions, but I think we kind of are,
Oh, don't you have it under
Well-
the markups under the table of uses?
yeah, I have those too.
I think the one thing that's maybe coming into this meeting is that you didn't mail out the updated workforce housing to the Housing Task Force. That's why, Judith asked the question, what does it look like? It's because we didn't actually get it. There's no attachments in the meetings,
Oh, okay.
so that we could have reviewed,
Let's,
what it looked like ahead of time. She's asking questions because she never got to see the
Oh,
final.
okay.
Is it in the packet for you guys
Well,
tonight? in the town
let's-
council?
It's online. I'll
Yeah.
email
Why
that
don't
out.
we
after
just
the
So, because
meeting.
I'm just trying to, where you're trying, so
Yeah.
you're looking at zoning now, right?
let's just kind of look, I want to just kind of look at, we kept getting off, I want to just quickly go through what we had suggested, so people can start thinking about, and you can send those things out. I want people to start
Yeah.
thinking about what they think would be realistic. So we did have this definition, reasonable and realistic opportunities for the development of workforce housing. I don't really know if we need that as.
No, I think we
People
got,
think
don't we on the new one have?
we need
I think the
that
main
as a
thing is the
definition.
tables.
Yeah, I think that there were some definitions. I don't think we could really need to work on
No.
definitions.
No, because I think that workforce,
the workforce
there's the housing one is
housing,
all you need.
yeah.
The one with the resident thing, realistic.
There
is-
were some tweaks we just added to the districts by adding or workforce housing, senior housing or workforce housing. But I think the meat of it
Yeah, it's
really
right there.
was
Yeah.
in the category of uses. And this shows right here, residential uses. Sorry, I'm getting text and it's annoying to me.
Can you blow that up at all?
I can probably make
In the
it
bottom right.
bigger, yeah. Thank you.
There we go.
Yeah.
That where it was at X is what it was. And we actually
We were very
suggested
conservative.
CU is
Because
conditional
we were
use.
afraid.
That if you don't understand what conditional use is, conditional use means it is allowed, but there are several hoops you need to jump through, and some of them have flames going around them.
It's not actually allowed. It's only allowed if we say it'll be allowed.
Yeah.
It's weird. Conditional use is like,
Special permission.
what's strange about that
And
is
we're-
like, if
we're
you
moving
don't
away.
trust your site plan regulations,
Then you should.
then you put in conditional use. Because you're saying like, well, we kind of think we want this, but we're not 100% sure we want.
It-
Good.
The other reason
We're
is-
not gonna make-
is-
Mike,
is
at some
if
point
you-
you did
if
say
you're
you
talking
don't
about-
want anymore. You don't
We
want
don't,
to
we're
do all
gonna
this.
get rid of
What?
conditional use.
At some point you said you don't want to have
Yeah.
conditional
We
use.
want to minimize the use of conditional
Okay.
use because, I mean,
what
one of
you
the
said.
ways that it's, I think the intent behind it originally was, because we have some RA zones right up against some of our downtown zones.
Yeah.
We wanted to be able to ensure that, yeah, this use is good for most of downtown, but maybe not in these 3 or 4 lots. So we made it a conditional use. which now means everybody who wants to do work in that zone has to jump through hoops.
Yeah.
Very unfriendly. And
But this is what we had for,
yeah.
For
So that's-
changes now.
That's sort
Yeah,
of
this
why.
was a-
try
There
and
was-
get away from banning it completely.
There were political reasons why we picked conditional use, and it didn't seem to help us. I would not suggest anything be conditional use that we suggest. It's either going to be permitted or don't allow it at all.
For the downtown zone and the transit zone, if we're calling it that, are we thinking of an overlay so then we avoid that, like, wanting to work around certain lots that aren't?
Haven't thought that far through yet.
Yeah, we haven't got there
It's a
yet.
good question.
I mean,
But it is a good question.
'Cause that would-
Yeah.
I mean, like, number on our agenda, the housing downtown, the potential zoning changes, and the housing champions, they're all linked together, actually. And I mean, I sent out to everybody, it was painful. The Housing Champions program.
Yeah, we're gonna look at that
The
next.
basic document is 35 freaking pages long. Before you even get any money or talk about any money, to just the application to get the designation, me putting that in Senate, that was 5 pages of like what the minutia is to qualify. So there's a point scoring system to do it. And what's important is if we're gonna do right, you're not gonna get any money from the state at all unless you get that housing champion designation. It is now the
Yeah,
gatekeeper.
and we're a ways from that, so,
Well, the only
I
reason I'm
actually
saying
spent-
that is like, so
Yeah.
if we're gonna do any changes, we wanna be able to score points. Because we
Yeah.
wanna be, the changes we wanna make them count so we can get money, because I
So-
think that's a town council goal. And so, when we look at this, it's like the downtown area, which is one of our focus, which the town administrator brought up, there's a lot of ways to score points there. And we want to, if we're going to do all the work and go through all the pain and suffering, let's score points so we can get money for it. So it's like, it's really important as we begin to look and prioritize, we keep that in mind.
I spent a good afternoon playing with that and trying to count our current points, and I think we're only about halfway there. But some of the areas are areas don't know in depth because they're outside of zoning.
The reality
but-
right now is that we don't, if you look at the reds, the black and the red X's, right now, residence duplexes, they're not allowed anywhere. And we suggested they be allowed by conditional use. I would suggest we should allow them. Residence multi-unit, all these X's, see all those red X's? They're not allowed anywhere, and that basically pretty much stopped the development of anything been considered missing middle housing. And that all came out of a fear for student housing. Yet, in the downtown, multifamily is still allowed by conditional use. Or is it anymore?
The only thing is, it's only allowed by senior housing. That's where
Yeah.
we discriminate against the rest of humanity.
And so you can't do
But
that.
those-
So those were the biggest changes that we made. And then the other changes that we made were, this is dimension, so this is the size of a family lot. Like in Residence A, you have to have 20,000, Residence B, 40, Residence C, 150,000. That's
That's the three, that's the
an
3
acre is
acre.
about 40,000, just over 40,000, so that's a lot. 150,000 for rural. And the issue is that, we wanted to cut those down a little bit, and I think we were pretty, the blue is what we suggested, and I think that's pretty conservative. That was still 80, Residence C is still 100,000. That's more than 3 acres. That's a lot.
So the changes
Or
that
that's
we had
just under 3
suggested in
acres.
2022 are consistent with what the state is saying in the Housing Champions. That's coming from New Hampshire Planning, and they're considering those to be areas that they think are the best ways to develop housing. So the things that we did 2 years ago actually are consistent with what the state is trying to incentivize.
I'll disagree with that. This is one of the areas where we will never score points, in my opinion.
Well,
It's not enough.
there is a square footage component in the housing champions. Again,
It's 1 acre maximum throughout your entire town.
it's like you don't, the beauty of the whole thing
Well,
is
we
that
can
there's,
get that.
there's enough ways to score points.
We're not
I'm just
going there.
saying that reducing lot size is a clear,
There's other places.
is a clear
Yeah,
area
right.
that they want to
We don't need those
emphasize.
points.
And the other one was the doing the multifamily and duplexes. That's another area the state is clearly wants communities to go to.
That's reasonable.
The last
Duplexes.
3 years, when you look at building permits of what's gone out, there's been a 3-year trend of moving away from single family to multi-unit, and the state is trying to incentivize it. So I think the work, regardless of the actual square footage, the work that we did 2 years ago is consistent to what the state is now saying they think is best practice.
Yeah. And then we did some changes on setbacks or whatever, but I think that the meat of what we could look at is really here, and in the table of uses is what's allowed. I think there's a lot we could do there. If you could send that out, people can start looking at it and then start thinking, well, what would be rational?
We made changes to didn't we, to the conservation no, because we did, things in the conservation subdivision would change in density because it takes numbers
It
off of
would.
the square.
So that's one of the
feet
things we
anyway.
need to decouple. And I didn't want to get into this. but-
Okay, so.
Yeah, it's
But
not-
my,
Norman's
my
not
envision
part
of
of
this, let's not play with R and RC, keep those numbers the same, but use the conservation subdivision rules.
Yeah.
To suddenly bang that up. So it's
Yeah.
like, you're given
Yeah.
a choice, 1 house per 3.5 acres, or, you know what, you can put 20 there, but they have to be within,
The pocket,
uh,
clustered together.
those 20 units have to be within an acre of
Yeah.
that 3.5, something like that.
Clustered, yeah. Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
But I
Because-
think that right now,
This would have done
yeah, the
nothing.
conservation subdivision has to be changed to be clustered, because right now it takes some of those numbers, which limits the amount of homes in those rural district and the RC district to be mega mansions still.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are still very high.
But anyway, so right now, if you look at RA, you know, you're looking at just under a half an acre. So basically, you know, our beloved faculty neighborhood is completely out of compliance with the zoning rules.
Most of faculty is out of compliance.
So, you know, those are the neighborhoods, the kind of non-sprawl neighborhoods that we, you know, use as examples that we don't allow now.
So are they, I guess the state is always accused of a one-size-fits-all. And this seems to me to be an example of that, you know, where they take something that's basically a rural community that they want to turn into a big subdivision. I'm wondering if
I don't think New Hampshire's doing
if they
that.
have any flexibility, can we get a
the-
variance from the requirements?
The analogy that I
Well,
use, so,
no.
and this is why I'd love to be playing around up at the state and with these groups a little more often, one of the analogies I used for the workforce housing amendment, when we were trying to work out the things, is that we have all these dials we can twist. Okay? The idea is you twist these three or four together to get the desired result. And the problem with a lot of the stuff coming down from the state is they're only playing with one dial at a time. And that's a hard way to get things done.
Why don't I put up the,
Or that fit the entire state, because it's going to help some people and it's going to really hurt others.
This
And
is
what you
the
need to be able
scoring.
to do is, like you're saying, have some exemptions built in saying, well, you know what, if you're shoreline, 1 acre lots don't apply to you. You know, you should be something else. You know, you should be
Yeah.
allowed greater, but you need to somehow deal with it this other way. It's not a get out of jail free card, it's a, you can do it, but there's a cost.
so this is their Housing Champions scoring card. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be able to, but I think this could be a good rubric for us to follow when we're looking at suggestions that we make, because it is the state. And I think you guys got sent this, you can look at it.
And if you look also like on there, the housing champion, because man,
These are the 6 things.
it's painful when you go through the minutia of this.
Some of this
There
is
is a
easy.
scoring card, because I found it to be kind of confusing when I went through this. There's a 2-page scoring card that lets you add up to get to 80, and it has the numbers
Yeah.
next to it. This one, I just gave you the minutia, because it's like when they talk about a cluster development, what exactly does that mean?
Well, I mean, I think some of these are, I think our adoption of land use regulations ordinance, we're gonna look at those and we'll have to see what we can get from there. Training in zoning board, I think that would be an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
Implementation of water and sewer infrastructure upgrades, it depends.
Where are they going to give us the money from?
Yeah, walkability,
No, but
infrastructure.
So any work you've done in the last X number of years counts.
Six.
And
Okay.
keep in mind, the Madbury Road
Madbury
project
Road is gonna give us a
qualifies
lot.
us for the number C,
Yeah.
letter C right
For
there.
C and D.
Even though it was already there? Oh, yeah,
It's
because
within-
it's
upgrade.
It's within 6
Upgrade.
years, 6 years of
And
the
improvement.
application.
So us replacing and upgrading the old water lines counts.
That's interesting.
And the
Considering you can't
walkability.
build another house in there without
I think
tearing
you're,
down
I
and
think
putting up a
you,
duplex.
the intent of it is the infrastructure upgrades have to be used to enable the construction of workforce housing. And so we need to keep that in mind when you talk about it. But I think in terms of like your thing, like state dictating stuff, there's a lot in this. There's a lot of ways to get 80 points. The state's saying you figure out what the
ADUs.
best way to get 80 points is for you.
Cluster developments and conservation subdivisions, we could score some points there.
Is this, are the benefits of this worth the changes that we might have to make?
So I
There's changes we're gonna try to make anyways.
in terms of money
Yeah.
coming from the state, I think that the state is going to face a really exceptionally challenging budget moving forward. State revenues are down and the federal ARPA money has ended. And so I hate to be like kind of blunt about it, but municipalities are going to have to figure out how to do this stuff on their own. And so when you move through this, particularly when you look at how robust the financial incentive scoring section is, it covers like 79E, TIF, all kinds of. What this is trying to set municipalities up is what works best for you and how are you going to finance this on your own.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of like, is it worth our while? Well, first of all, you have to build the housing anyway. So if you're adopting a lot of these things, it's very likely you have the tools in-house to get the development done. For example, the Sophie Drive Banner Web development, they got no money from the state. They still built it. So the idea would be is what can you put in place? I think it's $5 million is what the state's going to have, which is like a drop in the bucket.
It's not much money,
Nothing.
But if you adopt these things and you have TIF 79E, you allow clusters, you make it economically development, you can still get it done without state funding. If you don't do any of these things, the chances of you building that workforce housing are incredibly remote.
But it
But
it
there's
gives
not
us.
a lot there that's bad.
No,
I
and it
mean,
gives us
So what I think the other thing is
foundation.
you look at New Hampshire has been trying to work on communities doing something, anything, and they even they have a report out about how many communities actually made zoning changes to help with housing. They're tracking this stuff,
Yeah.
and what they're seeing obviously is there's a lot of communities that don't want to do anything. And, Newington's a really good example of that. So, areas with lots of land don't even want to do it. But if what's wrong with wanting inclusionary zoning?
Or it
What's
can-
wrong with wanting form-based code that
The
allows for a
form-based code,
diversity of?
yeah.
So I think what they're saying is that they haven't been able to force us to do it. So now they're trying to find ways for people
To
in all
incentivize.
communities to sort of look at it. And I don't see that that's forcing anybody to do anything because we keep talking about
Actually,
local
let's go
control.
Go back to the,
The only one that
so if you look at number 4, the form-based code, so that one's talking only about something that occurs in the downtown, right?
Yeah.
Right now, we don't qualify, but we were just talking about conditional use. So if we took in our downtown areas and made the CUs for multifamily, multi-unit, into Ps, we would suddenly get 10 points for number 4.
Yeah.
Okay?
And we may
That's
not
10
even
points
get
we don't
anything built there.
Right now, we only get 20 points, I believe, for the zoning. We're allowed 40. That would be a way to get us up to 30. Right
Just
like
changing that, yeah. So this could be interesting. The manufactured part, we had a member of the community say maybe we should readjust that. We can certainly come up with very good guidelines to allow a manufactured housing ordinance park under certain conditions. They have changed immensely, and just to put it in perspective, in Northampton, a park is opening up some new area. They have some nice ones on Lafayette Road that are literally in Northampton, and they are opening up more land and offering brand new mobile home parks starting at $350 for a mobile home, manufactured house. So that is very attainable for many levels, and they are actually they're often bigger than a typical ranch and cheaper.
Right,
And yet there are costs because there's land costs and stuff like that, but they're part of a community, so it's really similar to being in a condominium complex. But you'd have to have community built ones, not single family, not single owner. A missing mill ordinance could be interesting. That multi-unit family housing containing 5 or more dwellings, that kind of goes along with that, allowing those townhouses, those row houses, so to speak, and townhouses, which we see everywhere, very popular. Extra's building them all over the place.
The PUD you guys are gonna do, right?
Well, that's what
I
I'm
don't know that
hoping is
one.
that if our PUD ordinance is generic enough, then somebody could potentially come in and use that to get this. Now, if, if it is only, so I think that's really going to be allowed. Keep in mind, just because we do something doesn't mean the points come automatically. It goes up to the state commission and they have to say, yeah, what you did is qualifying. So if our PUD zone is really a postage stamp in the entire town,
Yeah.
we won't get credit for it. It's got to extend across enough of the town that the commission is going to say, yeah, that counts.
Well, mixed-use zoning, if we, in our commercial areas, and we did have people agree to that, taking some of those, that's a great, if we want to encourage manufacturing or jobs or whatever, or a company to come there, they could add housing to have, even supplement their own employees.
Right. Again, that's one that if we wanted to as part of the downtown, we could potentially get it, but it means getting rid of every CU.
We got to get rid of the CU.
And it's, because it's got to be permitted by right. Permitted by right's that P.
Yeah. And we could, yeah. A multifamily housing ordinance could be interesting. The PUD,
But,
minimum lot sizes,
yeah,
no greater than an acre.
And that's why I said, well, 11, we're not going to worry about. Keep going.
Yeah, like everywhere.
We're not going to do 11.
No,
Keep
that's not
going.
gonna happen.
That is not gonna happen.
I
Tiny
mean,
homes.
like I say, there's like 15 or 16, 14 places where
Yeah.
you get 10 points, and we only have to score 4. We can only count 4 of them.
Yeah.
So there's plenty there.
Yeah.
What about tiny homes allowed by right? They're not even considered
That one's a maybe.
homes.
I mean,
They're not
that-
considered homes by the state of New Hampshire. They're literally like if you had an RV parked in your backyard. I'll put my son in one if I can.
No, I mean, to Paul's point though, so you only need 80 points. You can only get 40 out of those things. So you can, I mean, again, there's enough ways in here to score 80 points that the state isn't dictating. I mean, again,
The parking is
planning
easy.
board one is 25 points, and those are all best practices. That's kind of a gimme. So if you do like 4 of those ordinances in the planning board, when you're already at 65 points, you're not that far away from score. So there's enough ways to score points here that allows every community, and that's not even getting to like the walkability and infrastructure.
It's this next one that's the big one.
What,
The town
transfer?
council has to get behind the training, because if you read through the training,
The training.
scroll up just a
down.
little more. You're beginning to go into that area. Qualification based on play. No.
Other
way.
Other way. Next section.
Down.
Right there.
Oh.
Okay. You can get 25 points out of this area. And there's, all right.
That's a lot of points.
Yes.
Right, but it's for land use members. That means planning board, ZBA, Conservation Commission.
Have to get trained.
And what does land use members mean? I mean, what does facilitating? There's not enough detail in these for me to really understand.
Well-
But notice the number 2, majority of each land use board. So that means it only takes the members of one land use board to kill 10 points.
I think
It's
what
only
they
2 hours. How
I
long
think
can that
what
be?
they mean by land use, by the way, is planning board ZBA is what they're talking about.
No, Conservation Commission.
Again, I think from the state perspective, because when you look down past the additional points, it clarifies with the bonus points you can get. The bonus points are, the state has a handbook, a training handbook. And so you can get 10 points if the majority of your planning board and your ZBA, inclusive of alternates, takes that test. And so that makes sense, doesn't it?
You have to take the test?
You have to
Yeah.
take a test.
You have to take
So
the
But
it's
it's
like.
remote,
You have to
right?
pass
So
the
you can
test.
keep looking at the book while you're taking
It's
the test.
remote. So the thing is, that's best practice. It's like, don't you want people
pass
who are
the
making decisions about land use regulations to have read the training manual and show that
It's
they know
probably a
how
good
it works?
idea.
So that's a good idea. So these are not, and 2 hours in your term. Your term is multiple years. So it does not, this is not a high threshold to go.
Yeah, it's
What they're trying to, the state has said over and over and over again, we want to expedite the planning process. Well, and I'm always like, wait a second, time out. Before you expedite the process, let's make sure everybody who's on the planning board and ZBA knows how the process works and can show they know how the process works. And it's getting educated. The state has invested a lot in these. I mean, some of them are brutally boring, these like YouTubes that are an hour long that go over land use regulations. But nonetheless, we want to make sure that our land use board members are doing continuing education and looking at it so that they are able to make good decisions. That is not a high threshold. That to me, that's best practice. We want to encourage that.
I brought in a bill one time requiring planning boards to have education. Rachel Roulard and Mandy Merrill had both been on the planning board, not people who are intellectually troubled. And they said
they
to
are
me, they arrived on the planning board without the foggiest of what
Yeah.
they were doing. So I brought in this bill that would require them to have some kind of training. Well, the municipal association, or the municipal committee killed that flat because they were saying we won't be able to attract anybody.
If they have to understand what they're
Right.
doing.
And then it was, how are they going to get this? So I approached the municipal association and I said, how about you guys putting out a CD? And they just have to spend, show that they have watched the CD. Well, the municipal association couldn't be bothered. So that was the end of it. But I think that sometimes these boards are making decisions that are illegal, particularly the ZBA. And so the stakes are pretty high. Plus, you have to be making decisions that are consistent so that developers know what the playing field looks like.
Yeah.
We don't want to have
Well,
people shopping for the right ZBA members.
The NHMA now has a significant amount of online training
Yeah.
available, and as well as these exams, the certificate to certify
Yeah.
for certification.
Yeah.
But even before that, I mean, there's several times a year
The BEA.
conferences
Yeah.
in Concord and
Yeah,
Manchester
a couple
They
times a
update,
year.
yeah,
There are
every
four
year
land
on
use
some
boards
unchanged.
Yeah,
rule
nobody
changes
have a lot of
or-
good information.
I've gone to them a few times.
Have you?
Yeah.
I've stopped
lunch
going because they
meetings are
tend to
good.
be the same
Same stuff.
ones every time.
Yeah.
They're really, but a lot of them are very excellent for new members. Because
They
they're
do
going
go
over
through responsibilities
exactly this
and
kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
I went
Zoning
every-
101
yeah.
and stuff like that.
I went to just about every one the first few years I was involved in it, and then I'm like, oh, I did that one, or I did that one, or.
I look at the agenda to see if the special things that are going on are
Yeah.
of interest.
But, I mean, I think that there are some options here that we could get.
And I mean, I think the other thing is if we make the community aware of what the
Infrastructure
training is.
improvements.
I mean, ideally, what we want to have is a pipeline of people, because not everybody is crazy enough to want to stay on the planning board or ZBA forever. And so we want to have, the training mechanism that we put out there to the community so that we're building the next group that can take over. And I think that's what the state's trying to say,
Yeah, I mean, actually, I wish they did that for members of our representatives in Congress and Senate on both in state and federal. It would be great if they had to take a test, because sometimes I wonder if they seem
Well,
to
they
know
don't
what they're
know
really
what the hell
doing.
they're talking about.
Yeah, this is, I just, like, sort of echoing what Heather said, I want to applaud the state. I think this is excellent, and I think they understand it's very hard to make municipalities do things. They're still trying to do that, which is
Yes.
good, like with ADUs, but to have an incentive like this, and I think this is really well structured.
Yeah.
You know, I applaud the state for putting this together. $5 million, I don't know, you know, I wish there was more, but
Yeah.
it's still something.
But now this is now the adoption of RSE 79E. We have it, but we don't really use it, and I think that our downtown, we could really,
And the other
That's
thing
a
is,
whole other
like, we
thing.
used, like, the RSA 162 is the TIF. We used the TIF to buy 66 Main Street. We used we were gonna lose $600,000 in parking fees if we didn't come up with a way to spend it. And so we were like, well, we don't actually own anything Durham doesn't own anything really downtown.
it does now.
And so we were like, well, let's use the TIF. Well, we went to UNH, we bought the property a little over $2 million. $600,000 was financed for the parking fees. The rest was paid for with the TIF.
The TIF money.
The problem is that we wouldn't get the 10 points right now because you really need that TIF to be shown to be used for housing. On the
Yeah.
flip side of it, though, if, like, for example, the Keefe property, if we use the TIF to do sewer and water going out there, we would qualify,
that.
actually double qualify. We'd get points for using the TIF, and we'd also get the infrastructure points. So it is a really well set up way. It's trying to lead you to use tools to get tangible housing.
So maybe looking at this and, you know, I just want to go through it today. If people want to just take a look at it, and then come up with some ideas how we can, with the zoning changes that we want to make, where they would fall, and some suggestions.
I'm wondering if we're going to run out of time, if we could take them like the first 4 at one meeting, or first 5 at one meeting, and then the next 5, to work our way through them thoroughly.
Well, what do you mean by the first 5?
Like a public discussion.
Talking about
or a
having,
Meeting discussion.
These?
I'm not sure how much here we can support. This is really,
There's a few things we can.
um,
Well, if you've already.
Is our role just
Well,
to
like-
recommend that
like
the
the
planning
public
board
works
go
stuff.
after this?
What was that?
Is our role just to recommend that the planning board and the town council go after this program? I don't think we can do much.
Well, I think we can use it as a rubrics, just to, in coming up with some of our changes. Because, well, yeah, we could, they're saying we do this, we could do that. I think more like when it comes to the like the tiny homes, stuff like that, we could go and say, hey, you know, we could allow ADUs, and we could make sure we create that in the conservation subdivision, that cluster development, we could look at that. The form-based code and the 5 units per dwelling, the manufactured housing ordinance.
Right.
We could suggest some of these things in our zoning
Yeah.
option. As to whether or not,
Well, yeah, who's supposed to do the checklist?
we could
So unless
recommend,
we make it clear to the
So this
planning
is-
board that our reasoning for making all these decisions is this program, and unless the planning board is on board with trying to attain this
Yeah.
qualification.
in my opinion, it's in the town council's lap right now.
it is in the
The
town.
town council has to tell me that they're interested in pursuing this,
Yeah.
all right? Because it's staff who ends up doing the bulk of the work.
Yeah.
All right? And if the town council doesn't want staff to put effort into qualifying,
Then it's not gonna make any difference.
it doesn't have to be on my plate at all.
So then what is our role as the housing task force?
I think
Encourage the town council that this would be a good thing to strive for.
Yeah, I
I
think.
mean,
And
we could potentially qualify next year, try to qualify next year.
Yeah.
If
Especially-
we started working now to put all the things in place.
especially, yeah, and I'm saying as we go through, we're
Yeah.
going to make zoning recommendations anyways. And I think already what we're having in mind already do fit this. So if we could be like, the zoning changes we do, we could preface that as per zoning, it's this, and we want to encourage this, and then as per the housing champions, it's noted this, just so that they knew this
It's
is,
nice to tie it together.
this would actually help us get there, but either way, we want the changes, whether you do it or not.
That would be
we
helpful
want
if
the
we
changes.
can put this on a council agenda.
It is.
And, well, it's on the planning board's agenda for this Wednesday to talk about. But if it could be on a council agenda, and I wouldn't expect the council to say, we're absolutely, but if the council said, we like it, we generally support it, that sends a message.
Actually, I asked Em to do that, and I believe she got it on tonight's agenda. At least initial discussion. I don't expect them to act on it
They're not going to
tonight,
act on it.
but that's supposed to at least, they would, because she was asking about links and things to get all the supplementary material into the town council packet.
Yeah, I mean, my take is I wanted initially just for the town council to please read this, and I think that was and that's why actually I took the time to like kind of grind this all out. It was like, the starting point is to have the planning board and the town council please read this because it's a significant program from the state. I think once they've read it, and I think it's true the town council has to say we definitely want to do this because some of the things in there, especially all the financial tools and the infrastructure, the planning board doesn't really get to do anything about that. That's on the town council. But I think from the housing task force, then once everybody's read this, we can say, hey, we think these are some low-hanging fruit that would be really help Durham build workforce housing. And not only would help us build it, but in the future would put us in line with qualifying for state funding, which is one of the town council goals.
Well,
So
what if, as the task force, we did put together some kind of statement and give it to the council saying, as a task force, that's if people agree.
I think we should send Al to present it with that statement, because I think
Coming from the housing task force?
I think there's more than one of us here who looked at it and said, this is way beyond our reach, why are we even talking about it?
Oh, yeah.
But if,
That's their,
you know,
it's for them
if
to
Al
take.
goes and says, these are the advantages of us, and when you go through each one of them, it's possible to attain the necessary number of points if we do a few of these important things. Otherwise, I think the council's going to say, no way.
It's a lot, but I think that when you're looking at it, from my
It's not on
perspective.
tonight,
No,
but maybe council roundtable or
But,
something.
yeah, so, I mean, from my perspective, knowing what we are probably already going to recommend, and then looking at these guidelines, I said, we're going to do that anyways. So why not just bring it to the attention of the council? If we could create some kind of statement saying we really support the adoption of Durham, of Durham adopting this housing champions as a housing task force, many of the changes, that we're going to be recommending are already going to fit within this criteria. And it would be worth it to at least take a good, hard look at it. I mean, we could create something like that.
Well, I can give you something for the next task force meeting, identifying each of these items and where we are and what would be involved. It might be a little harder for me to get all the answers for infrastructure and finance stuff.
Yeah, but how
I'll
about
try.
just a general statement
But
that we
all
can
the
send?
zoning, I can let you know where we are and what would be involved. Some of these are pretty easy.
how long ago was Riverwoods?
It was in 16, 17.
isn't it
It
2016?
opened 5 years ago.
Yeah,
Riverwoods, that it was approved?
it was approved.
No.
Oh, no, it was before that because it was being
That it was
built when I-
completed.
When was it built?
That would have been 14.
When was it
4 years
completed?
ago?
When was it completed?
So that qualifies us right there for all the water and sewer stuff. All right, because new connections for a water and sewer.
All right.
Right, was going to, that's like 15, 20 points right there, I think, that we just got, I think we just maxed out the public works stuff.
I think if you, to your point, Judith, if we could get this put on the town council agenda and, I would be more than willing to do at least a
Do a
presentation. of
basic
why-
presentation.
And I say that because it's huge. Just a brief synopsis of A to F, which are the 6 scoring categories, and why it's a good idea for
And
us
how,
to do it.
and how it's attainable, how we can
How it's
actually get there.
attainable, why we should do this, how it's attainable, and what the benefit of Durham is, just so that it goes to them.
Great.
And then I think that would be helpful because then that will at least give us some purview of
And I
putting
think it might
effort
be in
into it.
506.
That would be
It might
great.
not, it might not be in your.
Get your,
in
get your
snippet.
jacket and tie out.
I will get it.
And the other thing is, and I forget exactly which section it was, I put it in an email somewhere, what the town gets out of it at the end.
Yeah, I didn't even
Right.
get to.
Which,
Yeah.
one of them is $10,000 per unit that gets occupied, that qualifies as, so you think about, we're talking about a potential workforce housing development of 100 or 200 units,
It's a lot of
times
money.
$10,000 straight to the town.
And then would the state give us the money if it's the HUD fair market rent?
Again, I think I'm more than willing to do that. If we only knew somebody on the town council to ask for it to be put on the agenda, it's like
I'm
we
sure
can
you,
ask.
Em would appreciate the,
And we can set it up and do it. I think it would be really helpful for us.
and then we can make a statement as a task force, and we can show them what we can actually, well, these are some of the things that we plan on doing anyway, so we could be there. We could get there. So it could be, because it really is, looking at it, I'm like, well, we were gonna ask for that anyways. We were gonna ask for that anyways. We're gonna suggest that anyway, so why not get some credit for it? We're gonna try to make the changes anyways.
So Paul, are you also convinced that this is worth trying for?
Well, it's, there it is, it's $10,000 per deed restricted unit built, okay? It doesn't actually, so I gotta go back into 5062. 5062 is where that is.
I don't have that.
The-
I just have this.
It's up to, I say it's up to the town council, but if they think that potential,
It's-
I think one of the reasons they only funded $5 million is how many people they're expecting to qualify
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
year, which isn't that many.
Yeah.
But as more people qualify, they're gonna have to make a bigger pot.
Yeah.
And I think,
But,
I think the thing about it too is if the more people that qualify, it'll put pressure on the state to like fund it. It's kind of like I hate to say the voucher program, but it's like that. But I think, I think us being in a position to capture the money when it becomes, I don't know what will happen in the future, but if the money becomes available, that we're in a position to grab it is what we want to be.
I think it's our responsibility as the task force just to present it to the council and have them consider it.
Al, what kind of reaction are the other towns giving to this program?
And,
Dover is like thumbs up. They're like, yeah.
Dover probably already.
Most other communities are saying, I'll say a lot of the more progressive communities have been they're like, wait a second, we're at 80 probably already. And it's like, yes. And it's competitive. They're like, you know what? We can go grab that money. Why would we not? We've already done this work.
Dover's probably there, but do you think any other communities
I bet
already there?
Exeter's there.
I think probably up in Lebanon, they've done it. There's other communities that are kind of cranking away. I have to say I was really impressed when I looked over that housing opportunity grants of what municipalities have passed in terms of ordinances. Plymouth did a remarkable job. So I think you'll be surprised. There are some communities that are going to be ready to do this. I think in here there still is a mechanism for those who are slow. I think what the state is saying is all of a sudden there's going to be a couple of communities that are going to grab that pot of money, and the other communities are going to say like, wait a second, how come we didn't get that? So I
We
think
didn't do any.
I think the communities that are doing the things that the state is trying to tell you to do, which are all generally best practices for building housing, are going to be rewarded. And I think they hope that the other communities that see them being rewarded will say, it's worth our time.
All right.
I'll put together something for the next meeting on how we stand with, what it would take to
Yeah.
comply, at least for zoning. I'll look into the infrastructure stuff.
And we'll also get together that summary of the outreach, and in the meantime, I think we can all start looking at some of the suggestions, changes as far as looking at the table of uses and table of dimensions, and just start thinking about like what you think we could change and tweak. Because I think we could probably do some even in just 1 or 2 meetings, is to create some basic changes that we can suggest.
Michael, would you be able to just come up with your idea of how far along we are in terms of meeting them, so that?
Oh, well, I
Al
did
can
send
take
a
that.
memo.
He did, yeah.
You know, we're close on some of
Oh,
them,
this
but
is here.
How about
we
for
don't meet a
total?
lot right now.
So Al could
This
say,
one-
oh, well, we're probably halfway there.
You
or-
sent
Yeah,
this one
yeah, well,
out.
we're definitely that.
Did you send
Yeah.
this one out?
I could have the zoning there by the spring if the town council was really interested in it. Because I could just do a couple of very small amendments. Like I said, I pointed out 2 of them where
Yeah.
all I gotta do is change like a couple dozen characters in the table of uses and we'd be okay. But
There's a few things that
I'll
we
do
can
that
do.
if the town council thinks that they'd be willing to approve it.
And there's some things that we could suggest, like if people are concerned about like manufactured housing, we could have a manufactured
But
housing
I-
overlay ordinance or something.
I
like
saw, in my opinion, I saw 6 different areas in the zoning where we could get those 40 points from. And it's just a matter of deciding which ones we think are the most likely to get passed. There are some that are non-starters, like
Yeah.
the minimum lot size one is a
Yeah.
non-starter.
Yeah,
I would
and-
never want to approve that one.
And,
But like,
so you did send this one out, so you should all
Yeah.
have it in your email somewhere. And it is the housing champion scoring, and it has the notes from Michael.
but I mean, we're already afternoon, if you want, but if you want, I could go through after the meeting's over and highlight the ones I think we could easily score on.
Yeah,
Maybe you could give that to Michael.
yeah.
I'm sure Michael can figure it out too.
Yeah.
Oh,
He doesn't
Well,
need my
the
input on
A-team
those.
here.
All right, well, we are getting close to noon. And so let's start wrapping your heads around some ideas for some suggestions, but I think they're right there. And I think we could
It's
start
very
putting that
exciting.
together pretty easily for the next meeting, which will only be coming up because we were a week late this week, so.
It's a week late next month too, I think.
Yeah, oh yeah, because
Veterans
it's
Day.
Michael, can
November.
I keep this?
So that's fine.
Can I keep-
It keeps us on course. So it'll be the 18th,
The 18th?
next meeting. Because Veterans Day is the 11th.
Oh, also, I'm doing the minutes now, so they're not going to be nearly as nice as I leave.
As long as they're in compliance with state regulations.
Yeah.
Oh, they'll be,
That's all
well,
we-
don't
all
say
we
that,
care
'cause then they'll just have
We
motions
had,
and
we had a
seconds.
meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know, so most,
yeah. I just don't have the time to be the detailed, and we have DCAT.
and we don't need,
Bare
we just don't need all this detail, because no one reads them, they watch the decal.
Well, they read Eileen's. Eileen's were very good, I just can't.
Yes.
Well, some people
Yes,
just are much,
detailed, been good.
are gifted.
It was a good exercise for me.
And she helped me figure out my computer today. All right, well, with that, I will take a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
And a second?